Meanwhile, David Ojabo says, all we needed was a chance. We didn't get our chance until this year. As soon as we did, man, we just took it and ran with it. That they did. They have run all the way to Miami for the Orange Bowl matchup with Georgia. As we continue our preview of the college football playoff, we go out to site right now. We sent Howard Griffith, Jerry DiNardo, and Dave Revson to Miami. Guys?
Mike, thanks and welcome to Miami. Just over 30 hours until Michigan and Georgia kick things off here tomorrow in the second college football playoff semifinal, the Orange Bowl, Big Ten versus SEC for a spot in the national championship game. A little bit of news made this morning. Been a lot of speculation about the availability of Michigan's All-Big Ten safety, Dax Hill. Jim Harbaugh addressed the issue publicly for the first time at a morning press conference, saying of Hill, quote, his status is going to be questionable. He's working through something right now. We'll know more today whether he will be able to play. Dave Revson joined by Jerry DiNardo and Howard Griffith, and Dax Hill, a significant part of this outstanding Michigan defense, for sure. Howard, you talked yesterday about his importance, particularly against Brock Bowers, the outstanding tight end for Georgia. What does the uncertainty surrounding Hill mean for this game?
Well, I think obviously there is uncertainty, but I would approach it this way. If everything's going to be okay and he's going to be available, I don't care when he gets here, he's going to play. As long as he's available, he'll be out there, and he has a high enough football IQ that he'll be able to go out and work and do the things that he needs to do to help this Michigan football team. We just don't know if he's going to be available, but I truly believe if he's cleared, he'll be out there.
You know, oddly, this could be more of a distraction for Georgia than for Michigan. When you have a great player like Dax, and he may not play in the game, you may start adjusting the game plan, right? Trying to take care of what you perceive as a weakness. And sometimes as an offensive coach trying to take advantage of news of a defensive coach, it actually could distract you. The only thing I'd say is, as well, if this is a health issue, I hope we've learned something, and I hope we're evaluating at a higher level maybe than when we first started having some of these health issues, and I hope he gets to play.
Well, I certainly hope he gets to play. He's been such an integral part of this Michigan defense, their second leading tackler, tied for the team lead in interceptions and passes broken up. So defense has been front and center for both of these teams, a huge part of the explanation for why both of them are here. But this is still football, and you still talk about quarterbacks. I think the quarterback situation is really fascinating for both these teams. Certainly if you're watching the Big Ten Network, you're well aware of the situation with Michigan. Cade McNamara has been the starter throughout the year, has played very well. They have sprinkled J.J. McCarthy in judiciously. If you're just catching up on Georgia and don't know a ton about them, they have a five-star quarterback in J.T. Daniels. He was injured at the beginning of the year. Stetson Bennett, a former walk-on, came in and led them to an undefeated regular season. They, of course, lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game. Bennett did not play particularly well in that game. There is a lot of call for Daniels to perhaps be inserted into the lineup. Howard, we all respect the walk-on on this desk, sitting next to one of the all-time greats in yourself. But what do you make of this situation for both sides? And let's start with Georgia.
Well, I think when you look at it from Georgia's perspective, you know, the backup quarterback is always the popular person in the room, particularly if he's a former five-star, and there is so much hype around his abilities and what he's able to do. Particularly when you talk about him, he's able to push the ball down the football field a lot and be able to take advantage of some of those things. But there's a reason that Bennett has been playing the entire year, because Daniels hasn't been hurt the entire year. He may not have been 100%, but there was a reason he was out there. He was still effective, and he was helping his team. Having Pickens back will be a big part of what's going to help these quarterbacks be able to take the next step. So to me, having him on the field and having his availability will help either one of these quarterbacks, but you just don't know, because there's some uncertainty of who can get the job done. And you mentioned the Alabama game. It wasn't just about the quarterback position that didn't play well. It was the offensive line not being able to protect the quarterback, and that's always a big part of the offense.
You know, it's extraordinary that we are in a game of this caliber and we're not talking about a great quarterback. Now, I think we all respect every single guy that plays on both these teams, whether they're the first team, whether they're All-American, whether they're a Heisman Trophy candidate. But unusual to say the least that in a game like this, we're not talking about one of the better players on both teams being a quarterback. You know, we could say they're a good quarterback, they're average quarterback, they're a little above average, whatever label you want to put on these quarterbacks. And we talk about complementary football a lot in relation to the offense is complementary to the defense. Complementary football offensively in this case is these two quarterbacks doing what they have to do to complement a really strong run game. They have to be 100% on the audibles. They can't make mistakes. If they're under pressure, a sack is maybe a good decision. So these two quarterbacks, the term game manager really does apply to these two. So complementary to a really strong run game is really smart quarterback play, not outstanding quarterback play as if you were someone that was in New York for the Heisman.
It's interesting when you mention that, right? There's not necessarily that great or elite quarterback that has led not only these two teams, but either of the four teams that are in the playoffs right now. So it's really about what these teams have been able to do and what their defenses have been able to do. So it's a little bit of a twist from what we're accustomed to in previous years when we've had that so-called number one quarterback in the draft that was going to be available leading one of these teams.
And I would say certainly the other game, and Bryce Young did win the Heisman. Desmond Ridder, certainly a very well-respected quarterback. But I will also say this about Cade McNamara, and I understand that he wasn't the starter at the beginning of last year, and there was a lot of hope that Joe Milton might be the guy that Jim Harbaugh had finally found as quarterback. I mean, Cade McNamara originally committed to Notre Dame, decommitted from there. He had offers from Alabama. He had an offer from Georgia. I mean, this is a four-star, heavily recruited quarterback. I get that he's 6'1", he's not 6'5". I mean, I get that, like, physically he doesn't blow you away. But, man, he makes great decisions, and this was a heavily recruited player.
Go ahead, Coach. I think one of the things that's key when you talk about McNamara is he has a great relationship with Josh Gaddis when it comes to predicting and kind of understanding what those next plays are going to be. And that's going to be important in this game because you have a feel for it. When things are going well for you, you have an idea of what your coordinator is getting ready to call, and that's what's going to help this team be able to move.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say about the quarterback situation is JJ, right? I mean, and people say, well, when he goes into the game, they're going to run the option. That is true, but you still have to have someone assigned to the dive, to the quarterback, to the pitch man. I mean, so even though it's predictable, and remember, this is bowl practice, so there'll be some unpredictable things that they'll ask JJ to do that are not on tape. But he can be a really effective guy, as we've seen him. And I said this yesterday, watching him from field level in the Big Ten championship game, his speed, elusiveness, and ability, it was much different than watching him on TV.
You can understand why people were falling all over themselves to get J.J. McCarthy. I mean, I said Cade McNamara is heavily recruited. J.J. McCarthy was everyone in the country wanted J.J. McCarthy.
And he was always committed to Michigan, and he never wavered from that, even when Michigan was struggling.
Plus, he was a second-team quarterback, and we all know.
We all know most popular guys are the second-team quarterback. It does feel like if there's confidence in the quarterback situation, like if that can somehow be quantified, there's certainly a lot more confidence in what's going on right now at Michigan, at least from the outside, although you listen to Stetson Bennett's news conference this week, he's not lacking for confidence.
No, he shouldn't be.
He feels quite comfortable about where things stand. Plenty more coming up here from South Florida, but for now we send it back to Mike in Chicago.
Meanwhile, 3 bowl games today for the league. Purdue plays in the Music City Bowl with no David Bell or George Karlaftis as they try to bounce back from their last Music City experience, a blowout loss to Auburn. Spartans play Pitt in the Peach Bowl. If they win, that's 11 wins this season for only the 6th time in MSU history. And late at night, Badgers play the Sun Devils in Vegas. Paul Chryst trying to improve his excellent record of 5-1 in bowl games as the Wisconsin head coach. For all the praise that the SEC has had in terms of different team, or in terms of making the playoff, it's only been 3 different teams. And now with Michigan getting in, that means the Big Ten has had 3 different teams make the playoff. The Spartans, the Wolverines, and the Buckeyes. The Wolverines will take on an SEC opponent, the Georgia Bulldogs, coming up in a handful of hours, actually. For more on that, we go back out to Miami with the guys. Fellas?
Mike, thanks. 2 great leagues going head-to-head. 2 programs kind of looking to get over the hump here. Michigan hasn't won a national title since sharing one in 1997. For Georgia, it's been all the way since 1980 since they have won a national title. And we certainly know the Wolverines have gotten over some humps this year, guys. They ended the 8-game losing streak to Ohio State. They ended the longest Big Ten title drought in school history. It seems like the same story, though, for Georgia. Rolled through the regular season, then their nemesis, Alabama, got in their way ultimately and beat them in the SEC championship game. Mindset-wise, how does that come into play, do you think? The fact that Georgia had kind of the same old story, whereas Michigan feels like maybe it's turned the page.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how both teams deal with it. Again, what another similarity between these two teams. I mean, Michigan has gotten over the hump, right? They've gotten over the Ohio State hump. They've won some big games. Their schedule has been tough. I think they're in a great place. You look at Georgia, they haven't beat Alabama. They haven't won the SEC championship game. And everybody says, well, not many people have. That doesn't mean it's still not a hump, right? I mean, nobody was beating Ohio State either in the Big Ten, but Michigan did that. So when you talk about mindset, we're much closer, obviously, to the Michigan program than the Georgia program. But I have to believe Michigan's mindset is better than Georgia's right now. I don't think there's any self-doubt in Michigan's locker room.
Yeah, when you talk about the uncertainty and you're talking about Georgia, it's the fact that they haven't won the significant game, whether that be the championship game, whether that be the SEC championship game. They struggled in that area, and something that is in the back of their minds as they continue to go out and play. So there's still questions there. But as you mentioned about Michigan being able to get over some of those humps, the big one being Ohio State, and also understanding that this team really has been focused on getting to a championship game this entire year, and Ohio State was part of that march to getting that ring. So I think they come into this game, as you've already mentioned, Coach, this is a very confident bunch. They understand exactly where they are.
And I think the schedule for Michigan gives them some confidence as well. You know, you look at the SEC right now, you know, in the East, Tennessee is down, Florida's down. In the West, LSU's down, Auburn's down. This isn't the SEC of a few years ago, and yet it's the Big Ten maybe that's taken over the best conference in the country. I mean, obviously Michigan's back. Ohio State has never left, although they're not here certainly. But the money that has been invested at Michigan State and Penn State, I mean, there's tremendous confidence, right, that those coaches are going to do well, and this conference is going to be really strong as we go forward.
And I would say this, the timing of those losses, you talk about in the SEC, Georgia losing to Alabama, their first loss of the year, they have questions about how they're going to get over the hump. I think the timing of when this Michigan team lost, right, they had to rebound quickly, and then they got right back on track. So I think that plays a big part of it, the confidence that they have when they've made a mistake and they've been down in games, they've been able to find ways to get back. That's also going to be huge.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, too, to think of, to your point, Howard, this timing notion and the idea of, are you at your peak confidence? I just don't see how Georgia could possibly be at its peak confidence. That doesn't mean that it's a lesser team, but give me a sense of the role that you guys feel like confidence plays in a game like this, to feel like, hey, we come into this clicking on all cylinders. Does that matter? Can it be a rallying cry if people are doubting you externally? How do you handle it if you're going into your biggest game of the year coming off of your worst game of the year?
I think where it helps you is preparation for the game. I would imagine that Michigan's probably had some of their best practices of the year. I think they're probably bundles of energy, confidence. They're at a place that no Michigan team has ever been before. I think it really impacts your confidence. Georgia's, the fans are still talking about which quarterback should be playing. So that has to be somewhat of a distraction. How many times has everybody said in the SEC footprint that Georgia's 0-3 in the championship game, 0-4 against Nick Saban? I mean, those negative things continue to get repeated.
Right.
Michigan's hearing all the positive things for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, in a long time. And I couple that with, you talk about the quarterbacks, and then you talked about Perkins. I mentioned him a little earlier coming back. But they still have not performed at the level that they need them to perform to win these type of games. We know they both have the talent and the confidence to do it, but how are they going to integrate themselves back into the offense? How's that going to – are you going to force the ball into Perkins quite a bit to try to make plays there? There's so much uncertainty. But, again, this is a Georgia team that's going to be very confident when they show up, right? Because they still believe, the SEC does, that they're the best conference, they have the best players, and all of the stuff that goes along with that. So it's no doubt in my mind that they're going to be flying high with confidence, maybe a little too confident when they look at this Michigan team.
You know, Howard, that's such a great point because the SEC fans get the benefit of the doubt and their players get the benefit of the doubt. Again, when we looked at their schedule to see what games to study, you know, I went to Kentucky, which is a good team.
Yes.
And then you look at Clemson, 10-3 loss, and then you look at Alabama, and the Clemson game was the first game of the year. In between, the schedule wasn't really all that competitive. But just like the college football committee, the CFP committee gives the SEC the benefit of the doubt. I think that probably does give the Georgia players some confidence, whether it's earned or not.
And believe me, in that Michigan locker room, in those meeting rooms, at the hotel, they're playing that up, right? They're playing that fact that they're being disrespected, and they're going to come out and play with their hair on fire. And I think this is why I think this has a chance to be one of the really great games, because it'll go back and forth.
Right. I mean, the second-ranked team playing the third-ranked team is a 7-point underdog.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. Again, I mean, you think all that plays in. And again, I think it also points to pressure, and there's just more pressure on this Georgia team. Now, how they respond, some people respond really positively to pressure. Some don't respond as well. But certainly, I think Michigan comes into this with nothing to lose. I mean, there's no one outside of Ann Arbor who expect them to be here, and I think most people in Ann Arbor didn't expect them either, frankly.
And most of the pressure may wind up on both quarterbacks.
Yeah. Well, that's where it always ends up in football, doesn't it? Every single play handling the ball. We have plenty more still to come here from South Florida, including a visit from former Michigan tight end Jake Butt. That's coming up a little bit later in the show. But for now, let's go back to Mike.
Michigan Wolverines are 1 win away from a berth in the national championship game Monday, January 10th in Indianapolis. For now, they're in a very different part of the country, down south in Miami, getting ready for Georgia in the Orange Bowl tomorrow. We go back on site now. Guys?
Mike, thanks, and very pleased to have a special guest with us, former two-time All-American tight end at Michigan, Jake Butt, joining us. Jake, I know you retired from the NFL before this season, so bring us up to date on what you've been doing.
A lot of this, and obviously striking while the iron's hot. Michigan's having a lot of success, so I'm kind of riding on that coattail, and it's been fun to watch. It's been fun to break down. I mean, I still watch football with that kind of eye, kind of like a coach, a player. I study film, and it's been fun to watch Michigan play and study their film this year. So hopefully we have one more game after this, and get a trip down to Indy.
Jake, when you were playing, how did Michigan handle team goals going into the season?
Well, I mean, I had 2 years under Brady and 2 years under Jim, and the team goals changed a little bit. You have the one game approach, the small, vision mindset, but you keep that big picture of, hey man, we want to win the game at hand, but we want to be Big Ten champions. We want to compete in the college football playoffs. So those were always the goals. We fell a little bit short. And I'm just happy for Coach Harbaugh, the success he's had this year. He takes a lot of the flack, dishes out all the praise, and they have an opportunity to do something special and put Michigan back in that, national glory.
I think one of the things that's always fascinating during this time of the year, when you have people that are opting out of playing in these particular games, and I know you played and had the injury, do you have any regrets about making the decision that you made at the time?
It's crazy to walk this field, because just down on the other end of the stadium is where, you could really argue my career changed. I tore my ACL for the second time and have kind of become the poster child for guys opting out of the bowl games. I don't have any regrets. I find that it's human nature to seek comfort, but it's actually an uncomfort that we grow. So I value those principles and those lessons. And I think it's funny how life works, man. Sometimes, when you get pulled back, you get knocked down. It's a springboard to other greater things. And, here we are right now.
It hasn't been that long since you stopped playing, but the game has changed so rapidly. How has, in your eyes, college football changed, and how has it changed in Michigan?
Man, it's changing. You got the NIL, the transfer portal. You don't want to be that old man that's sitting on his porch like, hey, get off my lawn, man. I don't like this change. But it is, man. You have to adapt or die at this point. You have to find a way to make these new systems work for you. And I think you can see the change from a program level, and even Jim Harbaugh on a personal level, how he's changed and the success it's given our program. The ones that change the best and adapt the best are going to have the most success going forward.
How has Coach changed?
Listen, he lost weight. I think he hired in Coach McDonald, letting our players take control of the locker room. Aiden Hutchinson, Cade McNamara, having that leadership within the locker room has been critical for us. And for Jim, it seems like he's found his joy once again in his competitive nature. He's having fun winning.
It's funny. So when I asked Jim that question in media day, he was like, no, I haven't changed. Everything's still the same. And I'm sitting there looking at him like, you're lying.
Right.
But tell me, when you watch this offense, particularly the tight ends, the way they utilize them, what do you see?
The full package. Obviously, it starts with, you got to be able to run block if you're playing Jim Harbaugh's offense. Love to run the ball. They're a run-first offense. So those guys, you watch them fill the hole. They're oftentimes off the ball. You see them snap linebackers' necks back. The spit goes flying. Some mouthpiece gets knocked out. That's fun. That's physical. But you see the Big Ten championship one-hand catches. They show the versatility downfield, in the flat, yards after catch. They're the total package. It's really fun to watch.
Now, you said you've been breaking down film a little bit. So what are your keys? What are the things that Michigan needs to do to win this game?
So offensively, this is going to be the challenge, the biggest challenge they faced all year. Georgia is a great team. Up before the SEC championship, we're only giving up 10 points per game on defense. 3 rushing touchdowns all season. So something's got to give. Michigan loves to run the ball. Georgia loves to stop the run. Something's got to give. Can we find crevices in that heart of the Georgia defense? Jordan Davis, he's a beast. He'll be playing on Sundays for a long time. Can we get some double teams to displace him? Probably won't have 200, 300 yards rushing this game, but you got to commit to the run. If you can get to 100 yards plus, you do well. And then on our defense, Brock Bowers, their tight end, he's a stud. I don't know the situation with Daxton Hill. You want to be at full power at safety, so we'll see if he can come down and make the trip, but stopping him is going to be key defensively.
What have you seen in McNamara this year? It feels like, and we were talking earlier in the show about the quarterbacks in this game and kind of the fact that everyone kind of wanted to see what J.J. McCarthy could do, and there's always this excitement around the second-string quarterback, particularly when he's a 5-star guy with seemingly unlimited talent. How have you seen Cade handle that situation?
So Cade's not Cam Newton or Tim Tebow, but Cade is perfectly capable of making all the throws that he's asked to make. But what I see with Cade is leadership. Pre-snap, putting your offense in a schematic advantage, getting guys lined up, getting the right checks and audibles. That gives you an advantage, going into the snap. I think Cade settles the offense. You want your quarterback to come in the huddle and the other 10 guys to look him in the eyes and say, we got your back. We know you're going to do your job. Cade's, oftentimes, and JJ's the same way. They play a game Saturday night and you hear of them in the film room 8 a.m. the next morning. These guys want to win. I think that leadership aspect is what Cade does best.
I do want to ask you one last question here before we let you go. You mentioned earlier that you had the injury that changed your career on this field. Is this the first time you've been back on this field since then?
First time, yeah, first time. And, this team this year feels like the 2016 revenge tour. We lost to Iowa. We lost to Ohio State. We probably could have been Big Ten champions, but we weren't. They beat Ohio State. They take care of Iowa. They're Big Ten champions. Now they're back at the Orange Bowl where we, fell short once again. So for me, it's less about, there's a little bit of nostalgia, but if they win the game, all will be forgiven.
But I guess my question for you is this. How would you advise student athletes who are going through the same situation that you went through, where you had to make that decision? As you've said, it's altered your career, and yet you wouldn't do anything different.
Yeah.
But how would you advise them in terms of how to make that decision, the right decision for them?
We like to make the world black and white, but it's not. We want a concrete answer, but that's just not the case. My values and my principles are going to be different than the next man. So I just tell these student athletes is to take as much advice, take it all in, and make the best decision for you. And that's going to be different on an individual basis across all the teams. So I support the guys either way. If you sit out and that's the best decision for you, I support it. If you decide to play, more power to you. I really respect that when you go out there and play for your team.
Well, one of the more interesting issues, certainly, that has arisen in recent years in college football. Jake Butt, really great to visit with you. Thanks so much for coming and taking a few minutes to talk to us.
Always great to see you guys.
Best of luck going forward. Jake Butt, former Michigan tight end. Let's go back to Mike in Chicago. We will see you back here on game day tomorrow, Mike.
Yes, you will. In fact, here's our plan as a network. There will be a special Orange Bowl pregame at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. I will be here in Chicago. They will be there in Miami. And then when the game is done, roughly 11 Eastern, 10 Central, we will have a special edition of The Big Show with plenty of analysis, highlights, and reactions from Michigan's game against Georgia. The Buckeyes will not be at full strength for the Rose Bowl. 2 star wide receivers and 2 big linemen, one on each side of the ball, all opting out to get NFL draft ready. Will be one of many storylines on this edition of the Rose Bowl. Rick Pizzo and Joshua Perry are kicking off our coverage from Pasadena.
Hello and greetings from not so sunny Southern California. Rick Pizzo, Joshua Perry in the shadow of the Rose Bowl, getting ready for Saturday's matchup between Ohio State and Utah. The great news, Joshua, the forecast is expected to improve dramatically before game day, and regardless of rain or shine, always great to be back at the granddaddy of them all.
I mean, this is a phenomenal game. When you look at the Rose Bowl, there's so much tradition, so much history, and lately there's been a lot of conversation about the meaning of this game in the face of the college football playoff and not being a playoff site this year, but this is a wonderful opportunity for both teams that are playing in the game.
Biggest storyline coming from the Ohio State camp, 4 players opting out of this game. We start on offense. Offensive lineman Nicholas Petit-Frere, and more significantly, 2 of the Buckeyes' top receivers, and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, will not play on Saturday. How does that affect Ryan Day's play sheet?
There are going to be some changes to the play sheet. When you look at Garrett Wilson and what he was able to do on the field, he was effective at all levels. They utilized him on jet sweeps. He was able to play in the intermediate game and also take the top off the defense at times. Chris Olave, a record-setting wide receiver for the Buckeyes, and he was a huge piece in terms of the deep game, being able to get behind defenses. And so now they're going to be missing that, but you still have Jackson Smith-Njigba, who was the most productive wide receiver in terms of receiving yards for the Buckeyes. And they've got some young guys on the roster as well who are going to be able to step up. You've got Emeka Egbuka, you've got Marvin Harrison Jr., you've got Julian Fleming, all guys that are going to be expected to play in this game. So if you're missing guys on offense, you would want it to be out of that wide receiver room just because of the depth that they have there.
Now, that being said, Olave and Wilson were at times security blankets for C.J. Stroud. How does the fact that they are not there potentially affect Stroud's decision-making in critical downs?
It's going to be unique because I think he goes to Jackson Smith-Njigba a lot in this game, and that's just because he's a guy who's been there all year. But you have to think about the practices leading up to the bowl game, and I think that's a big part of it, is the preparation helps him get ready for not having those weapons in place. So I think C.J. Stroud's going to be able to go out there and be confident. He's going to probably want to rely on that run game a little bit too, so Travion Henderson is probably going to be a big piece in this one.
Now, defensively, Haskell Garrett opted out of this game. Now, he didn't have the All-American caliber season that he had a year ago, but still a very important piece on a defensive line that was torn up the last time they played against Michigan. How much does this affect what Ohio State can do defensively, and what do they have to change from the last time we saw them on the field?
Yeah, you want to be solid in the middle of your defense, and that's why a guy like Haskell Garrett is so big, is the solidification that he puts there. He's able to make those plays, getting behind those offensive linemen, creating disruption up front, but also keeping the linebackers clean. And so I think this is a by-committee approach for Ohio State now, where they want to rotate those defensive linemen in there. And you're absolutely right. They were susceptible to some of those runs, especially in the middle of their defense. And Utah is a team that runs the ball really well, second in the nation in yards per carry.
So when you start to think about what Utah wants to do offensively against what Ohio State was unable to do defensively against Michigan, how concerned is Ohio State from the defensive perspective?
I think there's a little bit of concern there, but if you listen to the things coming out of Ohio State's camp during bowl practice, that toughness, that edge, and that physicality up front was a big point of emphasis for them. And so I think they had the time to really reflect on the tape that they had from previous games and understand what they need to fix heading into this one.
Be very interesting, the mental approach for Ohio State as well. We'll have coverage throughout the day, and we'll focus on that mental approach as we report on the big show later on this evening. It is the Rose Bowl. It's the granddaddy of them all. But as you mentioned, Joshua, it is not the college football playoff. We'll discuss just how locked in we think the Buckeyes will be for this game.